Part 16. To be is to will. Without will, there is no being. To will or not to will, that is the real question. Embodied beingness is equal to having a directive principle as the true, authentic self. In essence, this means to have and express one's sovereign free will. In the world system, from birth onward, all children are taught the opposite, to be will-less and without directive capacity as an integrated whole being here in life, standing on the land. For purposes of settlement and closure of any and all outstanding debts, claims, and liabilities, the expressed will and reclamation of life establishes the office of the executor to settle any claims against the estate. It removes the presumption of consent that the state will act as executor of the estate. All such liabilities are then liquidated out of the value of the equities of the estate, returning the estate to balance, which is returning to solvency. Once this is done, all reversionary interests, which means everything generated after the presumption of death, must revert back to the true beneficiary as the living being. Thus, we do not have to attempt to place commercial liens on the public system, which, as pointed out, only increases the bondage of the living beings by the cult of death. We simply need to regain our equitable interests and beneficial rights, out of which all debt can be settled and extinguished. To get an idea of where that equity is sequestered throughout the world banking system, have a look at the audited financial statement of 2012, the linked copy of which shows over 800 accounts, but the author herein has on file similar documents showing over 1,300 accounts. The document linked does not show the amounts, but suffice it to say, the smallest of which is in the billions, and the larger ones, of which there are many, shows balances that are in the sextillions and septillions. Of course, these are fantasy numbers that were created by a century of off-book private trading of all the bonds we have discussed, but nevertheless, this was the coffer from which the NWO intended to control the world. The posting of this item does not indicate any alignment or participation with any group or organization. It is done simply for context of what has been discussed. Overall, it is sufficient to say that the illusion of debt bondage is just that, an illusion. There is no monetary, mathematical, or economic reason for the world system of debt other than the false illusion of voluntary bondage. We have all the means by claiming our estates to liquidate the debt and have plenty left over for a nice tea party for all of humanity. What we all were not told when we came of age is we could have done this long ago. Instead, we continued as landless serfs in bondage to the Lord of the Manor, the Lord Mayor of London. He and his captains of legal piracy then created debts, securities, and bonds as liabilities against the estate, while trading such securities for years and decades. This trading, out of sight of the general public, created incalculable wealth for every man, woman, and child on the planet. Once the death of the flesh occurs and the estate is abandoned, they continue to reap such earthly rewards whilst the soul is harvested in heaven. As above, so below. But again, remember, in the law there must be a remedy. So the Lord's Prayer provides that too. Forgive us our trespasses or debts, as we forgive the trespasses of others. A trespass is a traversal as well, when we cross over to the realm of the dead and leave life. Therefore, the remedy is that we can claim our estate, prove our life, have standing on the land with and as the living, and liquidate the trespasses that bind our beings to the fictions of the money and law system and the offloaded karmic debt of those who have done nothing for this world except to create poverty, disease, violence, and destruction. But then again, they are we, and we must take full responsibility to avoid being the victims and the powerless. In short, we must face ourselves and take responsibility for our actions in all respects. This is where a true understanding of what we have termed the enemy construct is essential. The construct is understood to be the internal split within ourselves that causes the energetic polarization that we project into the world in order to deny it within ourselves. Conversely, when we take full responsibility for our world by healing this within ourselves, the world too will be healed as we return to true union. The completion of the global system of bondage was realized when the United States Corporation was put into bankruptcy in 1933. What followed was the creation of a securities system to bind all flesh, then the globalization of the Federal Reserve Note, and the private jurisdictional system by and through the Empire State, New York, where the Fed resides. Every new being born into the flesh was captured, bonded, and placed as a ward of the state, and the underlying estate was and is plundered from birth to death. This is a global system, not just in the United States. It is all consolidated into one centralized system of Ba-Ang-Ka, banks, and every nation is a corporate subdivision of the Crown Corporation in the City of London. When a baby is born, the mother acts as the informant to inform the state, to place the form of the infant body into the original corpus, body as a fictional corporation of a trust. And the lineal ancestral estate is now under the guardianship and management of the United States, a bankrupt debtor in possession, collateralized by all bonded property and lives, the creditor being the Crown and the Holy See through its corporate agent, the Federal Reserve System. When the mother acts as the informer, placing the baby's physical body into form, declaring it abandoned, and effectively declaring that within the Sestakv Act this being now incarnate has been lost at sea, the first sea of the mother's water. The baby has come through the birth canal, received by at the dock door. This establishes the metaphor that the baby is a ship from the sea that has been birthed, and is then claimed by the portmaster at the dock. This is also why all charges in the court system are placed on a docket. At birth, the hospital and its corporate officers act in the capacity to receive the vessel, arrest it, and hold it until the adjustment of any claims. This takes place in legalistic terms because a baby is born in sin, which means it misses the mark of being able to come to life. So again, words, birth, B-I-R-T-H, birth, B-E-R-T-H, birthing at the dock. It's all been locked in place because these are all admiralty and maritime terms that have been constructed as overlays upon the physical reality. The metaphor in the New Testament is that Jesus walked on water, which in fact means he rose above the commercial dead fiction in admiralty/maritime law and stood in life after having settled the waters of commerce. One must be born again, which means to leave the realm of the dead and rise above the maritime fictions into the book of life. The mother and father have full capacity to contract or not contract, but now it is mostly by rote, as they are all forced to play their assigned roles because they too are wards of the state and have entered a contract with the state via the marriage contract and license. This has been implemented progressively over the last 75 to 80 years. By their acts out of ignorance, the baby is abandoned and has no patrimony because the father is not involved in the process of informing, and the state takes control. There are 7 years in which that life can be claimed. At the age of 7, the baby and the life is presumed to have died and now must be attached as surety to the franchise that is created by the birth certificate. The all-capital letter name that many have erroneously called a straw man is nothing more than a franchise of the United States that permits the being to have limited beneficial use of property as the Sestake Trust and to operate in commerce. When babies grow up and are ready to enter quote-unquote life, or more precisely the similitude of life, they must do so on the citizenship that flows on the sea of commerce. This is now all controlled by one unified system of securitization and bondage, known as the Uniform Commercial Code. The UCC is the law of merchants, mer equaling sea, commer being with the sea, thus the law of the sea. When the baby is born, the estate has an initial value. It will increase in value over time as bonds and securities are created against that value, then sold and traded through Wall Street, an institution whose original function was to sell African slaves into the North American market. It now sells the paper that bonds the slaves under its control to the world financial markets. All of this documentary paperwork is actually stored in North America in a Canadian city called Hull, Quebec, another use of word manipulation whereby the persons are held as cargo in the hull of the ship of North America. There is also a hull in England. Nonetheless, a man or woman can always return from sea and claim his or her estate. It is always there to be claimed. If it is not claimed when a baby is grown into a man or a woman, he or she remain a ward and a bonded indentured slave until, presumably, on average at the age of 68 to 72 years, the flesh dies, the soul is harvested, the estate is abandoned. Now, there is obviously a public estate that goes through probate. That is just the little stuff. The substance of the underlying ancestral estate is abandoned, consisting of all that was accrued over the course of the lifetime through the bonding, buying, selling, trading, and so forth, the profits and proceeds of which are lodged in the accounts shown in the 2012 audited statement linked above. If it is not claimed after 3 years, it is harvested. The death certificate harvests the trust created by the birth certificate and the remainder/reversionary interests of the private estate. This, of course, reverts back to the state and its owner, the corporation, the city, the crown, and the Father in heaven. During the course of a lifetime, the baby grows up to be a young man or woman, volunteers to be a registered agent to receive service of process for the franchise within the commercial corporate venue under statutes and codes, and as stated above, codes are in fact codicils that are addendums to the will. A statute is derived from an origin form known as a statute staple that gave to the creditor, quote, a bond of record acknowledged before the mayor of the staple, by virtue of which the creditor may, on non-payment, forthwith have execution against the body, lands, and goods of the debtor. End quote. Imagine that. The attachment, as in stapling pieces of paper together, gives the creditor, the Federal Reserve as agent for the Crown Corporation and the Lord Mayor, right of execution against the body, lands, and goods of the debtor. The Lord Mayor is then considered the global mayor of the staple for such capacity and right of execution against the entire world population and their bodies, lands, and goods. Is this why we buy our commercial bond paper at a corporate store named Staples, and the Performance Hall in downtown Los Angeles shows 3 pentagram stars in its official image? There are no coincidences. The first 1040 form signed by the young person is the first codicil, giving the system further control over the estate. Of course, the baby, the being, cannot contest it, because he or she has no will, taking us full circle back to the discussion of the Lord Mayor. Let's have a closer look at the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, Vatican City is heaven, and our Father is the Pope, hallowed be thy name, sanctifying the name of the Father as sacred, as deified. Thy kingdom, the crown, come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. This means that the earthly realm will become the sole body of the Father in Rome to own and control forever. Whenever it is stated, thy will be done, it is externalizing our own will. If one does not have a will, one has no presence of being, no directive principle, and hence no actual presence in life. Without a will, the estate is abandoned intestate. No presence in life is equal to being abandoned and lost at sea, whereby one has not claimed one's life and hence cannot stand whole. Religion is a form of bondage, binding oneself to the will of the Lord Mayor and to the will of the Father in the Vatican. But remember, in law there must always be a remedy, and hence it also says, "Forgive us our trespasses," or debts, as we would forgive the debt/trespasses of others. This is essentially paraphrasing how the modern system of commerce, negotiable paper as money, and settlement of accounting functions. The Lord's Prayer is a commercial contract within which we have the capacity to settle debts, which upon settlement and closure is equal to the function of stabilizing oneself in life, and to be aligned with life, to be whole, to be solvent, to return from the realm of the dead. All of the world's people are held in bondage through this system. Each has a franchise in the corporation into which they have been born and bonded. This is also what is known as a cestake trust, which is the beneficiary, and defined as a trust in which a limited beneficial use is granted to one party in which title is held by another. Title is held by the king, the lord, the crown, managed within the U.S. corporation as a bankrupt debtor in possession, which means the debtor is allowed to retain possession of the property but has forfeited the right of true title, which is held by the trustees of the bankrupt estate, owned by the Federal Reserve as creditor, as are all other national corporations. The limited beneficial use allows us to use the property that belongs to another, which is the state. We have limited beneficial use, but not full beneficiary status. In law, this is the usufruct, the right to use something that does not belong to you. That includes your home, your body, your children, the whole lot of it. Additionally, we always volunteer to be the trustee because in trust law, the trustee holds the liability. Whenever one goes into a court, which is equal to stepping onto the ship of a captain, you are supposed to be the beneficiary, but you agree to be the surety and to carry the liability as the trustee. When they call the name of the franchise, the people, thinking that that is who they are, stand up and say, "I am here," which effectively is a statement that I am here as that name, the trustee of the franchise it represents, and standing here as surety to take on the liability of whatever charge you lay on that franchise. Thus, you pay the fine or do the time.